bell ring. Good night.
Hey everyone, we are just about ready to go live. I'm just getting all my stuff set up on my end here, and we're going to dive in.
We are the Sultans.
Spend another minute or so
We are the Sultans.
with dire straits as we wait for people to arrive. All right, it's 2:01. People are starting to arrive, and almost as though I planned it, the song starts to wind down. I love it. All right, welcome everyone. Good to have you guys here. Dr. Fred Blum, Breaking Free from the Stress Cycle. As usual, I cannot see who's here. I just see that people are here. So if you want to leave a comment that just says, hey, it's me, tell me your name, I would love to know who's here. And no requirement to do that. Just, I would like to know who's here. So I think we have a really, really, hopefully valuable presentation for you guys today. It's called Breaking Free from the Stress Cycle. And this is a model that I came up with a number of years ago. I used to practice, some of you may know this, as a holistic chiropractor. And at the time, I was trying to create a model that described how stress led to pain and dysfunction, ultimately physical breakdown. But then as I was thinking about sharing this model with you guys here now in the current iteration that I have as a performance or self-inquiry coach, I begin to think about how this model actually applies on a much broader spectrum. It's really about how we deal with stress and ultimately how we live our lives. So what I want to do is illustrate some of the primary ways that our current strategies for dealing with stress may be leading us in a direction that we really don't want to go. So what I want to do is share my screen with you here, right here. Starting to learn how to use this tech now. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, let me just select the correct window. There we go, right here. All right, perfect. So, we're looking at my screen. I don't know, by the way, while the screen is on, I can't see you. I can't see your comments. So if I don't respond to them right away, please understand. But this is the stress cycle. Let me move this little diagram over here out of the way. Perfect. And essentially, just to go through it quickly, we have these 5 different stages here, moving from this point of chronic stress overload. I'll unpack all these in a moment, into the stage we call defending, intensifying, disconnecting, and surviving, which just puts us back in the cycle, and around we go. So what I want to do here is begin to, first of all, give you an understanding of each of these 5 different sections, 7 different phases of the stress cycle, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what this might mean. So the first aspect, the first thing that we deal with is what we call chronic stress overload. And what I mean by that is simply stress that over time begins to accumulate. Now, we say there are different types or different flavors of stress. Very simply, we're going to say that stress can be physical, anything from falls or car accidents to, staring at your phone all day, kind of hunched over, or sitting at a desk. All that kind of stuff is physical stress. Chemical stress, everything from poor diet, drugs and alcohol, environmental toxins, things that overload our natural ability to detoxify, accumulates in our body. And third, we're going to say, generally speaking, emotional stress. You guys know what I mean by emotional stress, mental stress or emotional stress, the kind of thing that just life kind of feels like it is beating down on us sometimes, whether it's family or money or work or world events or COVID. This is what I mean by emotional stress. Now, In a perfect world, I'm actually going to stop sharing for a moment. In a perfect world, what happens is we're designed to interact with stress. Stress comes into our system, primarily our nervous system, whose one of its main jobs is to adapt us to our environment. The stress comes into our system, and in a perfect world, we would adapt. We would learn from that stress everywhere, from a physical to a emotional, even to a spiritual level. We learn, and then we send that stress back out. So we're constantly moving that energy through us. But what happens very often is that stress is too much for us. Either it's just been going on for so long that it wore us down, or it was too intense all at once, or any number of factors that might have caused us not to be resourceful enough to deal with that stress effectively. So then what happens is that stress comes in, but we can't process it. So we hold it. We begin to lock it into our systems. Because the reality is, sometimes we don't have the resources that we need to effectively adapt to the stresses of our lives. Now, if you can look back on a previous live that I did about stress and resilience, and it'll get more into that. But the bottom line is, what happens when we don't have the resources that we need to effectively adapt to the stresses of our lives, things start to break down. Okay? And we store that stress then in our bodies as tension in different types of ways and forms. Okay? So let's go back to sharing our screen for a sec. The only problem with sharing the screen is I can't see the notes. I want to make sure that I say, that I'm sharing everything I need to share. So I'm going to have to refer back and forth like this, but it's all right. So we're going to move now from that chronic stress overload phase where we have accumulated too much stress. We are not adapting now. We are building stress in our bodies and minds, to the second phase, which I call defending. Now, as I said a moment ago, your nervous system's primary jobs is to adapt you to your environment. Oh, what's going on here? Sorry. I must have hit a key. One of your nervous system's primary jobs is to adapt you to your environment. Let me fix this. Get everybody right on track again. There we go. Okay. So when your nervous system can't effectively do that for whatever reason, that sets off what we're going to call the fight or flight response. I think you guys have all probably heard that term before. And this fight or flight response literally creates an entire body-mind physiology designed for one purpose only, which is to help you deal with what your brain, your nervous system perceives as a threat to your survival. Now, what your body's going to do when it feels that its survival is threatened, it's going to take all of the resources that normally are designed for day-to-day living, for thriving, for what we call the opposite of fight or flight, which is rest and digest. It's going to take all those rest and digest resources, and it's going to funnel them into what you need to survive, which means it's going to take blood, literally take the blood out of the higher parts of your brain and put them into the lower, the lizard, more emotional-based parts of your brain for your survival. It's going to pump blood into your peripheral muscles so you can run or fight for your life, okay? It's going to take everything that it considers, the energy from whatever it considers to be non-essential, and pump it into these fight or flight life-saving systems, okay? Makes sense? Now, what are some of the effects that fight or flight physiology might have? Well, let's just look at a few examples, okay? We could talk about blood pressure. What do you think is going to happen to your blood pressure in a fight or flight or stress physiology? You think it's going to go up or down? Right, exactly. It's going to go up. What about muscle tension? You think you're going to feel relaxed and free in your body, or you think you're going to feel tense? Exactly. Okay. Here's a different one. What about digestion? What happens to your digestion when your body's in this stress physiology or fight or flight? This digestion is not an essential survival system in this moment. So your body begins to turn it off. It begins to put all that energy that it was using for digestion into survival. So then people begin to say, well, I'm having, muscle tension, headaches, pain, my blood pressure is too high, my digestion is too high. What if we could slow that down? What if we could then allow that energy to come back into our digestion? What about your mental emotional state? Okay. What mental, emotional state might be more suited for a fight or flight type situation, right? That would be more intense emotions, anger, fear, things like that. So those begin to become like your dominant underlying state, like without even realizing they're going on anymore. That's just what's happening. So now what happens is we begin to move into the next phase of this process, which we're going to call defending. Now, into the next phase, which we call intensifying. But I'm realizing here. Yeah, okay, here we go. Good. I just want to make sure because I had to move my notes to a different area so I could see what I was doing. So yes, moving into this next phase that we call intensifying. Okay. Now, this is the point when you can't easily ignore those warning signs any longer. Let me turn off this sharing for a moment so I could see what's going on. Hi, everybody. So in this phase of intensifying, this is where you can't ignore what's happening in your system any longer. Some of your body-mind systems have reached threshold, and you're beginning to experience various symptoms. Now, what is a symptom? A symptom is simply a warning signal. Your body-mind is reaching the limits of its adaptability, and some way your body is attempting to let you know that. So basically, a symptom is telling you that something needs to change. And ultimately, it's as simple as that. So a big part of the art of living is to learn how to discern these symptoms and make the necessary course corrections sooner. Now, I want to share a little bit of my personal belief here. Okay, I want to give you a couple of elements that I think are really important in understanding how I see this model. First of all, I believe that life is intelligent and that it's intelligent in a way that we can't even really comprehend. So an example that I use sometimes is, whatever maybe you had for breakfast or lunch today, let's say it was a tuna sandwich. As you sit here right now, that tuna sandwich is being converted into heart cells and kidney cells and liver cells and eyeballs and teeth and toenails. Your body is literally creating a miracle every moment, thousands or millions of times. This is the intelligence of life that lives within us every moment and that we are part of. Now, the second belief I want to share is that I believe that life happens for us, not to us. So to me, that literally means that the infinite intelligence of life is constantly working for us. It's guiding us to live our lives in alignment with us. Angela says, yes, and that tuna sandwich is dead and now it's creating life. Very good. Exactly, Angela. It can take what looks like inert matter and convert it into a living, breathing human being. Okay? So my goal in working with my clients and my students is always to help them to align with this wisdom, with this intelligence of life, whether we call it true nature or God or intelligence, it doesn't really matter. Because when we don't align with this intelligence of life, we find out that things can go south pretty quickly. Okay. And I know that there's someone watching this right now who really knows what I'm talking about, who has been in this intensifying phase. Let me put that back up again. That intensifying phase where the symptoms are beginning to really kick in, these warning signs, and they don't know what to do about it. They don't know. It's just building up more and more. And at a certain point, because we don't know how to respond to those warning signals, we get into the next phase, which I call disconnecting. Now, this is where we begin to check out, okay? This is where we're doing whatever we can just to numb the pain so we can keep doing what put us in this dysfunctional situation in the first place. This is where we're looking for symptomatic treatment. It might be drugs or alcohol. We're doing whatever we can do to disconnect from the pain so we can just keep doing whatever it is that we're doing. Obviously, this has all kinds of potential, long-term detrimental implications. Because now, instead of listening to our body signals and making the necessary course corrections, we're just disconnecting. We're checking out. This is where a lot of addictions start for people. You see? Because we're no longer, in the flow of this wisdom of life as I'm describing. We're no longer aligning with our own true nature. We're now just trying to get through our day, and we're doing whatever we have to do. And I understand sometimes it seems like we have responsibilities. We have things that we're accountable or responsible for, and it feels like we can't stop. We can't slow down. But what I'm saying is ultimately we have to. Life is telling us that whatever we think is the priority isn't going to work for long. And this disconnecting stage, it's literally, we begin to numb ourselves out to life itself. So we begin to contract. We begin to contract smaller and smaller into a little shell where all we want to do, and as we move into this next stage now called surviving, it's just kind of like we're now accepting that this is my life now. And we call that apathy. We say now we're just in this place of, why even bother? I'm just going to keep pushing forward. I'm just going to keep doing what I do. Ultimately, of course, it leads to some kind of a breakdown. It has to, whether we end up with a heart attack or, high blood pressure or whatever it is, or, chronic stress or anxiety. This is now the natural outcome of ignoring the symptoms, right? As we go into this chronic overload state, as we begin from here, let's say, and our nervous system becomes engaged and we move into this fight or flight place, our body begins trying to warn us that we're reaching a threshold. But we ignore these warning signals instead, so we disconnect. We do whatever we can to keep doing what doesn't work in the first place, and now we're in this state of survival. Now we're in this place where it's just trying to get through the day. Which of course brings us right back into that state of chronic stress overload. More stress comes into the system, more survival, more defending, intensifying, disconnecting. And we find ourselves back in the place where we began, okay? And that cycle continues over and over and over again, building up more and stress and tension in our system. We have someone here identified as Facebook user. You have to, unfortunately, the way StreamYard works is I don't see your names unless you there's a particular way you have to do that with StreamYard. But if you want to let me know who you are, I'd love to address you by name. But thank you for your comment. Diet and meditation can help. But here's what I want to say about that Facebook user. In my experience, doing this work with clients and patients for 30 plus years, I've worked with an awful lot of meditators and people like that. And listen, there is no doubt that a healthy lifestyle is critical, ultimately, in living in the flow of life. But my experience is that we have been taught, conditioned to disconnect from ourselves and from these signals of our body from such an early age that most of us don't realize how much we're missing. We just don't know. We don't see how disconnected we are. Does the meditation help with that? Unquestionably. Are there likely blind spots? Probably there are. Okay. And this gets to the next piece of this equation, which is really, what is it that we do about this? Because this thing, right, this stress cycle, I'm going to put it back up again for a second. This stress cycle is going to continue throughout your life, throughout all of our lives, until we find a way to interrupt it. Now, you can interrupt it at any of these points. You can interrupt it as you're beginning to move into that stage of defense, as you're beginning in the intensification, the disconnecting, or the surviving phase. We can interrupt that cycle. And the key to interrupting the cycle is awareness. What I mean by that is you have to begin to see the system beginning to break down before it gets all the way to this point of survival. You have to notice what happens when my system, when my body mind is going into fight or flight. How can I begin to slow down in that moment? You want to begin to notice what happens when we're in the intensifying phase and the symptoms begin to build up, and you say, okay, what is going on here? How are these symptoms? What are these symptoms trying to tell me about how I'm operating in life right now? We want to begin to notice in the disconnecting phase that somehow I'm feeling less alive, less engaged in my life. I'm starting to retreat more into a shell, and it requires that I make some kind of a change. I take some different actions in my life in order to step into this, to begin to reverse this cycle. Angela says, recognize before the crash. Exactly, 100%. Before we move into that surviving phase, can we begin to take the feedback that life is giving us, or family or friends are giving us, and begin to see that we've gotten ourselves into a cycle that is unhealthy for us? Because as you begin to bring more awareness into this process, the process of defending can become the process of opening to life. Intensifying can become learning to listen to life's messages more closely. Disconnecting can become reconnecting to ourselves, to our innate wisdom, to the intelligence of life itself. Surviving becomes thriving, engaging fully and purposefully in our lives. And chronic stress overload can become effortless flow. So that's what we're offering here. The possibility that life can change, that no matter how far you've sunk into this cycle, that you can begin to turn it around. And the key is awareness. Wherever you are in the cycle, like right now, take a moment and notice, where might I be in this cycle? And just slow down. Slow down right here for a moment. Just be present with whatever you're experiencing right now. What's happening right now in your body or in your mind? Can you notice your breath, the tension that might be in your body, your emotional state? Now, I want to point out, this isn't about fixing anything right now. This is just about noticing. Trying to fix things before you're really ready to step in and fix them is a common pitfall. But can you just notice it? Can you slow down enough to listen and ultimately reconnect to the wisdom of life? Eventually, we'll begin to see that there's a part of us that is untouched by all this craziness, all this stress. And I call this your true nature or your true self. I've talked at length about what I mean by true nature in previous lives, and I invite you to go back and check some of those. But let's just say this is the part of you that doesn't get caught in the stress cycle, the part of you that has direct access to the intelligence or wisdom of life. Now, tapping into your true self isn't about eliminating your symptoms or your stress, but it gives you a very different perspective on it. It gives you the perspective as a witness, where you could begin to see this process from a little bit of a different vantage point, where you can begin to make different choices rather than just kind of swimming, like getting caught in the swirl down the drain, right? Now, I want to be honest with you guys. Most of you are going to need help with this. Now, help might look like different things, but it's very difficult to do this on our own, especially depending on, let me get back to the screen for a second. 1, 2, I'm getting better at this now. Here and boom. Okay, especially as you move through the cycle. Once we get to this disconnecting part and we get, from disconnecting into surviving, it's going to be very difficult to shift this entirely on your own. You could begin to learn to breathe. You could begin to slow down. But at that point, there are so many layers that you've accumulated that it gets difficult to do this on your own. We have some comments here. The challenge is the doorway. Absolutely. If we're in a place where we can see it that way, meaning that if we're really stuck in this stress cycle, sometimes it's very difficult to see it as a doorway, right? It becomes like a problem, something we have to fix or deal with, instead of an opportunity to see something more about ourselves or the way that we've been living. Another one here says, this Facebook user, I love, love, love doing awareness presence practices in deep inquiry. Yep, that's what I'm talking about. And it takes some practice, but this is the direction that I'm trying to point you in. And another faith, this is Tom, says, yes, this is it. When I found this, I stopped that cycle for years. I would choose to go into self via the heart anytime I started feeling triggered. Beautiful, beautiful. So what we're trying to do here is just begin to bring awareness to this process, okay? The further down into that cycle that we get caught, the more lost in it we can become. So I think that's about all I want to share here. I want to invite you again. Look, it's not a sin to need help when we fall into these, these kind of dark places, when we fall into, I'll bring it up one more time, when we fall into this place of, really being lost and, feeling disconnected and feeling in survival or apathy. We need help to move through those parts of our lives sometimes. And that's what I'm here for. I really want to invite you, if you feel like something I've said here resonates with you and you feel like you need support to move through this, if you have a high pressure job where, a lot of people, a lot of things depend on you and you just feel like you're treading water all the time, give me a call. Okay. Reach out to me on Facebook or just call me, right? My number is, I'll just tell you my number. That's the easiest thing. 512-584-9075. Just give me a call and let's set up a time to talk about this. Let's see if we can begin to help you find a leverage point in this cycle where you could begin to create some freedom, because those leverage points exist all through this cycle. At every point, there's a way to begin to turn it around, even at the very furthest reaches of it. But like I say, you're probably going to need help with that. And that's what I'm here for. So as always, I have so appreciated you guys coming and joining me. I appreciate your comments. I hope this has been valuable for you. And, please continue. Let me, leave comments or questions in the chat. If you're watching this after the original live, please let me know and also put your comments and questions in there. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Take care.